everyone. This is Emily Braley, NV Rides Manager. I'm here with Dr. Belinda Alexander of Texas Tech Health Sciences Center, and she is going to talk to us about her research on volunteer ride programs. Hi, Dr. Alexander.
Hi there. Good morning.
Morning. So I just wanted to start off. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. Well, actually, I'm an occupational therapist, and I've been practicing for, I start to lose track, actually since 1992. And so I'm now in a faculty position. I do have the luxury of still getting to practice clinically to some degree, but the bulk of my career was really in the clinic.
Yeah, Dr. Alexander is an occupational therapist, and I think occupational therapists deal with older people and driving. That's part of the role. I don't know if you could tell us a little bit more. Maybe how does an occupational therapist interact with someone who's a senior and considering whether or not to drive?
Right. So really, the beauty of our profession is we get to work with folks from the start of life towards the end of life. And, as we get older, and a lot of us are starting to have parents that are getting in this elderly time frame, it just became a little more personal to me. But it's, when you look at driving, and that's such a milestone, when we were younger, we couldn't wait to drive, and it certainly allows us that independence. But as we get older and our bodies may begin to fail a little bit, that's a scary transition. And our profession has the ability to work with folks to try to help keep them safe or safer in their cars. So we have a program called Car Fit that addresses helping them to continue to drive. But we know that that next transition of maybe I need to begin to think about not driving. And then, of course, what do I do now that I'm not driving at all? So we can kind of take you from being safe. How do we get to that transition? Can we evaluate some of your skills to see indeed, do you need modifications, or maybe do you need to really start thinking about not driving? And of course, we think of the elderly because that's such a large population, and it's continuing to grow. But, as therapists, we can also, this can also apply to those who have mental and physical challenges that interfere with their driving. So we can really work with them kind of throughout that entire transition. So it's a fun profession to be in.
Yeah, I think one of the things that stood out to me is, and I found out that occupational therapists sponsor Safe Driving Week for seniors. It's a big push for your national organization. If anyone watching this looks up American Association of Occupational Therapists, you'll see that they talk a lot about safe driving. So definitely a profession that seems to embrace helping people make that transition and improve safety.
Absolutely.
I was really surprised when I found that out. I wasn't sure which field did that. And it sounds like occupational therapists are on the forefront of helping people make those choices. Right.
It's another neat aspect of that is our professional organization has partnered with AARP and AAA, which a lot of people across the nation are familiar with those groups. And so it's nice to see that partnership, so that, there's power in numbers, and so that we can help folks in that transition of whatever that kind of looks like for them.
Yeah, it's going to be unique. And I think that's, occupational therapists work one-on-one with people a lot. So I think that's something you guys are kind of going to be doing probably a big push as our population ages. So
absolutely.
That's going to be big. How did you yourself get interested in researching volunteer rights programs?
You know, before I came to the university and started really teaching full time, part of my clinical practice involved paratransit assessments.
Mhm.
And so it's interesting. My career, I really have kind of been in specialty practices. I've done burn rehab and then hand and upper extremities. So very much in the orthopedic aspect, lymphedema, and then boom, I kind of found myself in the opportunity of doing paratransit. And I loved it. I loved the contact that I had with individuals. And, you know, sometimes I felt a little more like social worker, but I was able to really see some of the challenges that some of the community members had. And several years ago, I think one of the most striking things, and this was all pre-COVID, was having several individuals tell me, you know, I haven't been out of my house in 6 months. I had one individual that had not been anywhere in a year. And you know, back then that was foreign. And, you know, just so many negative psychosocial issues go along with just being isolated. And of course, now COVID has brought that to the forefront. But what I recognized is that I had individuals coming and I could approve them for paratransit, which is a great service. But even if they were approved, not all of them could still access that service. Sometimes that was even a physical limitation, even though paratransit can accommodate wheelchairs and such, but finances were a big factor. And it, you know, it just really, it really hit me that no matter our finances or our physical or mental status, we should be able to access things in our community, and not just things that we have to, you know, not just getting to the doctor or just getting to the pharmacy, but it just really tugged on me. And then when I started my doctoral work, I never dreamed this would be the direction I would go. But I'm so thankful I did. It really, I always knew we needed something in our community to help those where finances really were a limitation, that lower income, older adults, and even those that are disabled. And so I'm, you know, so thankful that my doctoral studies kind of led me down that road. And so I really started looking out to see, hey, what are other communities doing? And that's when I kind of stumbled on the volunteer transportation. And then luckily I found you guys.
Yeah, I think we're unique for sure. I think paratransit has a role, and like you said, it's so important for people getting around, and you know, it connects people. But I think you're right. There are people for whom paratransit is not going to be their full solution.
Right.
I think sometimes services like that, at least in this area, can be limited to some certain types of appointments, or they can be hard to access for people. Or sometimes they have that last mile problem where people are, you know, able to get somewhere, but not all the way, depending on where they are. And for seniors and people who live with disabilities, it can be hard to finish that trip where they need to go. And I think volunteer programs, like you mentioned, kind of stand in the gap. They can help people make those connections. And you know, people being at home for an entire year. Now with COVID, it's even then it would be a lot, but you know, in the before times, that was unheard of, that you would not leave your house for a year. So,
seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, when you think of community mobility, and you'll read that, you know, there's so many options and challenges. And that's the thing, there's not a one size fits all. And having other options available, wow, it is so important. And it was obvious to me that the volunteer transportation really filled a gap. And I was like, that's my aha, you know, that's my, oh my gosh, I've got to get one of these started. And then of course, just started looking more into and researching it and finishing up my studies. But what a great thing. But there's not that many of them, you know.
Yeah, I think that's a challenge. I think one of the things about our movement is we want to bring it to more people because every community needs this. It's how do you customize this to your community? So if you have, can you describe your research into volunteer rides programs? What did you study and what did you find?
Well, you know, I started looking, one is we don't have a program here in Lubbock. And in fact, the closest programs are more than, 6 or 7 hours away. Mm. And so when I found, so as I started looking, I looked at some programs in Texas. And of course, COVID was on kind of beginning to get in our face. And so when I found you guys, one, you had for me to be in Texas and you guys in Virginia, you had good information available for me to kind of look at and learn. But then that opened up other just resources related to older adults and transportation. And so really it just kind of opened the whole, my eyes really did get opened to a lot of the support and opportunities that are available. In addition to just seeing that this could be a possibility and how could this be a possibility. But one of the things that as I was trying to figure out really how to narrow my focus for my research, our professional organization had a booklet that they had put together about older adults and community mobility. And as I was looking through that, one of the recommendations as far as future research was looking at different types of community mobility. So not necessarily just public transport or paratransit, and looking at engagement. And when we talk about engagement, we mean us being actively involved in things that we enjoy, things that we have to do, that we need to do. And so no one had really looked particularly at volunteer transportation and that aspect. And since I had an interest and I'm like, hey, I think this is a program that our community needs, I really zoned in more on the volunteer transportation programs.
Yeah, so you studied volunteer transportation and community engagement, which I think is, all of our goal. That's one of the reasons we exist. We don't, our life is not just going to medical appointments, but it's being engaged in our community, socializing and
right.
enjoying a rich, complex life. So you studied people, and I'm sure you can explain this better, but you studied people in your community compared to people who had access to volunteer transportation. And maybe right. I think there were some differences and some findings that kind of highlighted the difference we make in the community and the kind of a needs and gap assessment too.
Right. So I was fortunate enough, again, as I was researching this, that I came across a measurement tool. And so I knew that it would probably involve some sort of a survey. Mm. And so especially when, I needed to have a decent number of subjects. I mean, that's always something, you don't just need one or two. And again, COVID and everything else, but we just kept plugging away. And so I came across a scale. It's an engagement and meaningful activity scale that had been created years ago. And then Dr. Aaron Aikman, he had started some research out at USC. He's now at Colorado State. And he was so forthcoming to when I contacted him about his survey, the scale, and he had done some modifications with it. And I was like, I really think this would be a good scale to use. It gives us some objective data, but it would also be something that wouldn't be too long for folks, to fill out. And that's always one of those things, it sounds great until you get it in front of you and then they're like, yeah, I don't want to fill this out. So I was able to use that scale. And then I had added in some questions of my own, just a few kind of related to COVID, just to see. I thought, why not? We're right in the middle of it. And so I contacted your organization, and y'all were, y'all checked with some of your partners, and I was able to have access to some of your riders. So you gave me numbers. And like you said, our community, we don't have a volunteer transportation. And so what I targeted here were more, I tried to target definitely older adults, hopefully even that lower income, which a lot of older adults fall into. I mean, that's unfortunately just how things tend to pan out sometimes. And so I was able to send surveys from Texas to Virginia. That was kind of fun. I was like, wow, somebody probably thought I was really popular getting all this stuff from Virginia. But we made sure that, your riders were protected. I have no idea who responded and who didn't, but we were able to get some valuable information, or I was able to get that. And so we had, despite COVID, and we didn't give them a really long return time, but we got some good numbers back, and definitely got some information that I felt like was valuable. Interestingly, when I went into this, I was thinking that, your clients, because they had access to volunteer transportation, would just blow the tops off on the engagement scale. And I really think if we could do this not in the midst of COVID, I think we probably would have seen those higher numbers. But what I wound up seeing were our community members actually scored higher. And I was like, at first I was kind of like, oh goodness, I have totally missed it with this. And then as I started looking a little bit deeper, I realized, one, COVID was you guys were hit a little bit harder with some of your COVID restrictions. Y'all also have a more populated and very densely populated area. We're a little more spread out. You can kind of see my background there, but here in Texas, and especially in our community, we are more spread out. And so as I kept digging, one of the things I noticed, and I think we had talked about this in the past, when you do research, you never want to do something that would harm somebody. Mm-hmm. And really, COVID kind of created that environment, because your clients lost a service that they were used to. Our community members, because they didn't have that service, they didn't really lose anything. And so that was one of the bigger things to me. It was almost like the COVID created that situation where we could kind of take something away from somebody. And that was what I noticed with your clients. One, you could definitely tell how important the services were, because they truly reported what a negative impact it was not having them. And not all of them had a backup source. And I know y'all's public transportation was also affected with COVID. And so, when you have a service and you're used to it, and then it's taken away, I think it really showed up negatively for your riders. they mentioned things such as the socialization was huge, and the beginning of onset of depression and feeling isolated, and that frustration. And we look back at COVID and we think, well, that was a year, and of course we're still kind of feeling the effects of that. But so we saw that kind of that psychosocial impact with your clients losing that service. We also, one of the things that surprised me was how many of them talked about the physical decline, because they had not been able to continue their activity and their engagement because they didn't have a way to do that. And of course, with the United States, everything kind of being shut down, I think it gives us valuable information moving forward that in the event we have other illnesses that affect our country, we've got to figure out a way that we don't create these scenarios of extreme isolation and inactivity. It was easy to see the value and the benefit that volunteer transportation can promote. And I know you guys, there's that protection of your drivers, obviously. And so I think, everybody did the best they could during that time, but luckily I was able to kind of gather some of that information, which to me just strengthened, wow, these programs have become such an integral part of these folks' lives, that during that time period when they didn't have access to it, it impacted them not only physically, but also from a mental standpoint.
Yeah, I think it was interesting that you had this natural kind of experiment that happened. Because I think people lost a lot, and I think we're still sort of gathering what we lost during COVID. We're still figuring it out as a society, and I think this is one of the things that for older people who depend on us, this is huge. And now that we're coming back and doctors' offices are open, we know the demand is there. We know people have had to postpone care, and kind of curious. We're always, if anybody's listening, we're always looking to recruit volunteers. We are trying to come back roaring. So hopefully if you're hearing this and you want to make a difference in your community, on a very flexible schedule, this is a good opportunity for you. And it is so impactful, I think, as you can hear from this. This is a question.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No. I say with you, you're the expert.
I don't know that I would say that, but that social aspect, and even with paratransit, that's a little bit smaller version of community mobility. A lot of those clients built relationships with those drivers, and then you get on, and I think that's just magnified in a volunteer transportation program. They build those relationships. And for some, that may be one of the few people that they truly interact with over a period of time, even just from their home to wherever they're traveling to. We've talked about some of the limitations in different forms of transportation, and I think the other thing that some of your writers commented in my research was, they needed that additional support that volunteer transportation can offer. Paratransit, those drivers, and a lot of those drivers go above and beyond, but their job is to get them from the door of their home to the door of the location they're going. And the beauty of volunteer transportation is you can provide that level of service. However, you have some volunteer drivers that can apply a higher level of interaction or service. And some can actually will choose to, stay with that person at their appointment or wherever they're taking them. They certainly have that some flexibility with, what I call piggybacking trips, or, sometimes you just need to run in somewhere and it may not take an hour or two. But some other forms of transportation, they're just not designed to handle that. I mean, and so that's, I think some of the beauty there too of several subjects responded that, they needed that additional help once they got to their destination. And that was something that the volunteer transportation provided.
Yeah, that is huge. I think that companionship and that help and somebody really looking out for people, and that's part of what makes this volunteer opportunity so rewarding too. It's really relational.
Right.
So if you're looking for something to do, this is something that makes a big difference. It doesn't take a lot of time, and it feels good. It's gratifying. You're with someone, you're helping them, and it can be just a couple hours, kind of when you need it, when you have time.
Right.
What makes a volunteer program unique from Uber or Lyft, or maybe, as you mentioned, like paratransit, perhaps maybe other than, of course, like the costs are significantly less in some cases, but what makes it unique? And I think you sort of touched on it, but anything you want to add, or, kind of how do we differentiate ourselves?
I mean, I think the biggest thing is that personalization, kind of like you talked about, that companionship. Being from the South, we our community prides itself on being friendly, but and of course my kids would tell you that I could strike up a conversation with anyone, but with Uber and Lyft, and those are great services, but you don't always know who you're getting, and those guys haven't made improvements in safety, but safety's another thing. Having clients, unfortunately our world is getting to the point where it doesn't matter the time of day or the location for someone to stand alone waiting for a bus or an Uber or Lyft. That definitely is something. Some of the subjects mentioned that they were afraid, they didn't feel safe. Availability, I think just from what I could kind of deem from some of the data that I got, I think Uber and Lyft is a little more used in y'all's area. Here in our community, it's mostly the college kids that use it. And we can kind of read into that they are using it for a purpose, and we're glad they're not driving after they've celebrated. But a lot of folks do that. The other thing is that, they've made Uber and Lyft really accessible, and even public transportation has used apps on smart devices and smartphones. But we have to recognize that the older population, a lot of them they're not as savvy with some of the smart apps. They still like to talk to a person. My mom particularly, she thinks she can just pick up the phone and call the store and talk to somebody. And they're used to that. They're not used to this. Everything is electronic. And so I think that becomes a challenge, and they get used to maybe some of the drivers here. You don't always know who you're getting. And unfortunately, the scary stories are the ones that make the news, and that's the ones they hear about. And so, those are great services, and they're part of that big umbrella of community mobility. But for some, that's just not a viable option.
Yeah, I think for people who, are used to calling, I think our system is great. You call and you tell them the time. I also think to some degree, and I don't know if this was mentioned, but the pre-arranging gives people a lot of peace of mind. I think people sometimes worry that Uber's not going to come, or it's not going to, get there on time, or our volunteers are arranged ahead of time. You know, someone's going to come at 10:45. They're going to text you or call you, probably call you and let you know they're coming. And they know who you are.
Exactly.
It's going to be a seamless, as opposed to maybe, calling an Uber and it's going to take 10 minutes to come or 15 minutes.
Right.
And I know that can be anxiety producing. So I think that's one of the things, but yeah, you make a lot of good points about the ability to call and talk to a transportation coordinator and have that,
right,
that relationship. Another question we got is, what can we do to strengthen volunteer rides programs? Or, what would you say, how could you make this better or bigger or serve more people?
I think just getting the word out, that's another thing that I come across in my research, and even some needs assessments that were done before, is that people still don't know what available transportation services are. I mean, I see that in Lubbock, and I saw that in my research. Some people saying, I don't know how to access it, or I really don't even know what services my community has. And so I think we always, we have to market ourselves. I mean, even as therapists, being able to let people know what can we work with people, what can we help you with? I think the personalization and all, I think you guys are knocking it out of the park. I mean, I think it was easy to see how appreciative and how much your clients enjoyed the programs that y'all offer. And then I think moving forward, and after COVID, I think we all realize we've seen in the media the effects of the older adults in nursing homes, obviously being isolated, trying to curb that spread when those were kind of shut down and people weren't able to come in and out. I think as just we move forward, we've got to figure out if or when another wave of illness hits and programs shut down, is there a way that we, have we learned things that we can still safely provide access instead of going from, open to closed? Is there somewhere in between that we can still provide that service? I think the other thing that I noticed with volunteer transportation, again, you have those volunteers that always seem to go above and beyond. And I've heard stories during the pandemic of volunteers, still checking on some of the folks that maybe they provided transportation for, brought them things where they knew that they couldn't access getting to the store and things like that. So, I think our world would be so much better if we would just reach out and help each other. Mm-hmm. Hopefully we've learned that a little bit from the pandemic, but it's evident in programs like what you have. And that's something that I hope to build here, is just that extension of reaching out and helping. I think transportation's overlooked sometimes, and we don't think about, or we take for granted getting to places. And when I started, you think, you talk about health and well-being for older adults as they age. And we immediately think, well, they have to get to the doctor and maybe the pharmacy, but it's so much more than that. And that's the, that social aspect, especially that you guys, and we've talked about, that was something that was mentioned over and over by the subjects, was that social part.
Yeah, I think that's huge. I mean, that's what we want to be. We want to be more than medical rides. We want to do medical rides, but we also want to, be people's community, and we want to form communities. That we're all over the place, and we're miniature communities. I think one last question we got is, and I think this person was asking maybe a little bit about health outcomes too. What are the benefits of social engagement and community engagement? I know you talked about like well-being and feeling, connected to your community. Is there any other, is there any other research, or what do we know maybe that would inform us as to why this is so important for people?
Right. There definitely has been research done, especially when you look at driving cessation. So now we have folks that can no longer drive. The numbers can be staggering. For older adults that stop driving and don't have access to their community, or to be able to be engaged in things that not just that we have to do, but those things that give us joy and pleasure. We see health declines, and that's been documented in the literature. You see, for some, they very quickly transition to needing to be in a nursing home or a facility, so they lose that ability to kind of age in place or stay at home. So some become institutionalized. The health declines, activity levels. We know that obviously we all need to be more active, and sometimes it's just, we know weather this time of year, weather can interfere with that, but also just being able to get to things that are important to them. The social aspect, feeling isolated. We know that depression can increase with older adults that have stopped driving and don't have that ability to continue to engage. And so we definitely, that has been documented. And again, oftentimes we focus on the medical. People do need to be able to get to the doctor and get their medication. But we also see that the more active we are, the more we engage in activities. In our profession, we call it occupations.
I love it.
That you have, that we're healthier, we're happier, we're healthier. And when that part of your life disappears, then we start to see that decline. And that's sad. There's research can show some pretty rapid decline, even earlier death than may have been had those folks been able to continue to be engaged and active.
Yeah, I think we're quite literally, for the people who use us, we are life-changing. We're an essential service. I think it's a good way to frame it if we go into another pandemic, that we are something that's really important and that we need to find a way to keep people moving, at least to things that are safe for them. And I think that, something we have to reframe all the time. It's an ongoing discussion, but I think your research really underscores that people who depend on us to get to doctor's appointments and to live a full life really need this service to continue their current state of well-being.
Absolutely. It's definitely an essential service. And those volunteers are those essential workers that we need. Obviously, like you said, we have to protect both parties, but I think too, just making it known to members in the community, hey, we need some folks that maybe aren't in that high risk category to serve as volunteers during this time when some of our other volunteers may need to protect themselves a little bit. So, the pandemic has been hard and relentless and kind of unforgiving, but wow, if we can, we have to learn from it, and hopefully we can, bring some positive forward. And, so that we got to find some good, and so if we can learn some things from it, and now I think we'll be a little better prepared for the next challenge that comes.
Yeah, I think we've learned how resilient we are, and all of us in our communities. And I think our volunteers are just real heroes. There's been people who've been driving this whole time, getting people where they need to go, getting people who didn't have an alternative where they need to go. They're lifting up our community. And so that's something, just all credit to the volunteers, but also our riders
Absolutely.
have moved through this with us and held on with both hands as things have kind of changed. So yeah, I really appreciate your time and sharing your research with us. I think it's always good to have that empirical evidence that, you know, it's not just that we are making people feel good. There's really like outcomes that are improved through our work and through the hard work of our partners. Is there anything you wanted to share or add, or maybe anything that we didn't touch on? Those were the questions we got from our community members.
No, I mean, I have to say thank you to you guys for believing in me and trusting me so that we could get some research and data. I'm so thankful for your riders that were willing to, you know, answer this crazy survey that's come from Lubbock and Texas, and they're like, we don't even know where Lubbock, Texas probably is. And so, you know, I really appreciate that. You know, definitely your volunteers are the foundation of y'all's program. And obviously you've done a good job getting good volunteers. I think the other thing too is, you know, for those that are sitting back thinking, oh, I don't have time for that, or, oh, I think volunteers, and, you know, I think some studies have shown the benefit they receive from reaching out and helping others. Again, I mean, if our whole world would just begin to help each other instead of going at each other, if we would help each other, I think everything would work a lot better. But yeah, you know, the volunteers are the heart and soul of it. And I can tell just from my end that your riders are so appreciative. I think they would definitely give their stamp of approval and say how essential the programming is. And you know, if anybody's watching this, that if you're like our community, you don't have a program, you know, I'm right in the trenches with you. I'm in that process of starting a program. And so, you know, there's great resources available. You still have to do some elbow work and some footwork, but you know, if I can be of any assistance to anybody, I'm more than willing. You know, this is, like you said, it's about all communities kind of recognizing the need of individuals. And so just, you know, I would be more than happy to offer any assistance that I can.
Yeah, if anyone's watching this and you need to present to your city council or your board and you need that research, I can send you the link to her capstone thesis. It's fabulous. It lays out what we do. And it's something that I think can really bolster your argument to start one of these programs. Right. If you need that real research, you don't want to just say, I think this is a good idea. We can say, we know this is a good idea.
Right.
We know this works and we know it makes a huge difference. So help us. This is a good place to start.
Right.
We've got data. We've got a subject matter expert, and Dr. Alexander has shared so generously her time and her data with our programming. And as she starts her program, we'll all learn from each other.
Right.
So thank you so much for your time. I appreciate everyone. Thank you, Dr. Alexander.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate you.